thank you all for coming. This has been really a great conference. Man, a lot of great talks, great conversations. Come on in, scooch to the middle. This is not a keynote. This is a intimate technical talk. Today, we are going to solve nullability right here, right now. That's right. So I was working on this talk this past weekend, and I like to bounce things off of my family. And so my 5-year-old raises her hand. She says, "Daddy, what is nullability?" She already knows about GraphQL. That was like her second word. It's like, nullability. It's when something is maybe nothing. Like you have a sandwich, you're going to take a bite, but poof, it's gone. There's really nothing. Daddy, why are you talking about this? It's like, that's a great question. I need you in all my meetings to ask the important questions. Why are we talking about this? Okay, we need a whiteboard. Let's say we need to write instructions for someone to eat a sandwich. Step 1, pick up a sandwich. Step 2, take a bite. Ah! Our sandwich is gone. Null. What do? We can panic, we can give up, or we can improve our instructions. Try to pick up the sandwich. If sandwich is nothing, go to the kitchen, get peanut butter, get bread, spread peanut butter on the bread, take a bite. Simple. Ah! What if our peanut butter is nothing? Okay, that's okay. If sandwich is nothing, go to the kitchen, try to get peanut butter. If peanut butter is nothing, go to the store, buy peanut butter. Ah! What if our store is nothing? Okay, it's okay. We go to the store. We try to go to the store. If store is nothing, go to the peanut farm. We grind the peanuts into. Okay, scratch this. Be a peanut farmer. Never trust technology. Everything is terrible. Thank you. Okay, don't be afraid. Come on in. This is a real talk, I promise. My name is Spalding. I work at Netflix, and also a member of the GraphQL Technical Steering Committee, where we are working hard to make GraphQL boring. And it's really my dream that GraphQL could be the reliable, useful, boring technology that we can build lots of great stuff on top of. And so let's talk about GraphQL, shall we? I work at Netflix, by the way. So we'll use this as an example. This is my homepage from a few days ago. And this is a simplified schema that could serve this. So you see we have a query, and we have a field called lolomo. Now, obviously, lolomo stands for list of movies. So this is fun Netflixism fact. And so we have a row. Row itself has a title. Row has a list of movies, and a movie has various attributes. Title, box shot is the picture that you see there. And then we can write a query to get our Netflix homepage. And we get a response from our server. And it looks something like this, right? We have our list of movies, but our image service has a bug, or it's down, or something. And so it tries to return us an image, but it can't. We get an error. That error gets coerced into a null. And so now there's a null in our schema. But that's okay. In our client, we can handle that. We can add null checking, and we can say, try to get the box art. If box art is nothing, then we add a little gray image and just put the title in that. And that can work well for this use case. We just want to entertain. The show must go on. And so, you can still click see Lupin, the next season, which is coming out next week. I'm really excited. But what if we have another null? And this time it's in the row title. This one we didn't actually anticipate, but turns out bugs happen. Who knew? And so now, hypothetically, if we're using a language that might coerce a null into a string, why we would do that? That's literally never what we want. But hypothetically, it could happen, and that would be a problem, right? So we have to go all throughout our client code, and we have to check for null everywhere. If this is null, if that is null. And that's kind of a pain. But that's okay. In GraphQL, we have a tool called non-null that we can add into our schema. And it looks like this. It's a bang. We add an exclamation point. And this means that we're making a promise to the client. Pinky swear, this is not going to be null under any circumstances. And so we make a query. We get a response back. There's no nulls. We're so happy. But turns out bugs still exist. And so we might still not have a box art. But it's not going to be a null. And so instead, it bubbles up. This bug in our image service gets coerced into a null. And then it bubbles up so that the whole movie becomes null. And so now, poof, no more Lupin, sorry. And it doesn't stop there. In fact, we put non-null everywhere. So it goes up even further. That whole row is gone. No preview content for you. I'm sorry. And it keeps going. And there we go. And everything's gone. Poof. Sad day. There was a bug somewhere swimming in your peanut butter, and then the sandwich you were about to take a bite of just vanishes out of thin air. That leads to a best practice in GraphQL, that we use the non-null sparingly because it has this destructive behavior. And so the schema at Netflix is going to look more like this. You can see there's one bang hiding in there on the ID field. The ID field, we feel fairly confident that that's probably going to make it across. Everything else, we want to be able to return partial data. The show must go on, right? And this is the best practice. You'll see in the official GraphQL.org docs that you want to use non-null sparingly. And so let's recap. In the beginning, everything is nullable. Null could be hiding anywhere. And null checking is a pain. You have to do it all throughout your code. And so we add non-null to GraphQL's schema. And this is great. But it turns out non-null leads to destruction. You lose data. You lose otherwise useful data that maybe you could use in your client. And so non-null is considered kind of harmful. And then in our schema, we go back to almost everything is nullable. And then we're back where we started. Null checking is a pain. So what are we going to do? Well, what if we could take all these nulls that are in our schema, all these bangs, these non-null indicators, and what if we could move the control to the client? Because the client really has better context to know how am I going to handle this. Because we're not really talking about null, we're talking about exception handling, and specifically exception handling in our canvas, whatever we're rendering. And so the decision as far as which fields do you really need to have, which ones are okay, we can work around it. That is going to be contextual. It depends on the UI you're rendering, depends on the canvas, even within the same product, same application. And this is also not crazy because in GraphQL, the query and the schema together are what forms your API. And so this is just extending that and putting more control into the client. And so this is what is known as Client Controlled Nullability. And there is an RFC right now against the GraphQL spec to add this. And sometimes you see a problem and you just find this beautiful, elegant solution, and then you implement it. And sometimes it's not so simple, or literally always, right? That's never is it as simple. So I'm sorry. It turns out the null monster still exists. It is hiding under your bed, waiting to devour you. Good night, kids. So let's back up a little bit and look at where we've come from, how we got here, and that's going to tell us where are we going to go from here? How are we going to solve this? So Tony Hoare, Sir Tony Hoare, British computer scientist, a pioneer in our field, invented the quicksort algorithm communicating sequential processes, which is the basis for concurrency in Golang. A lot of cool stuff. In 1965, he was working on a language called Algol 65, and this language was going to have objects, and you could point to them in memory. And he had this problem of initializing a recursive object that refers to itself, and it's kind of a conundrum. And so he created something known as the null pointer, which is simply a pointer that points to a place in memory that doesn't exist. But this is really, it's a really useful thing. And, it's not actually the idea of nothing that is a problem. I mean, you could be out of peanut butter. This is just a fact of life, right? The problem is when anything, anywhere, could be null. When the sandwich you thought you were about to take a bite of, suddenly, boom, it turns out it's null. That's the problem. As Sir Tony Hoare said, you have to check for null or perish. And so Sir Tony Hoare actually, from the very beginning, thought this is something that your compiler should be able to help you reason about. This should be possible. And so he's done a lot of research over the years in general, compilers and formal methods for verification of programming. But it's taken quite a while for this to make it into mainstream computer languages. Now you get to 1990, and we have Haskell and the ML family of programming languages that are introduced. Now, is anyone here using Haskell in production? Raise your hand. Okay, awesome. Now keep your hand up. Now show me with your fingers, how many users do you have? 3, awesome. Live your best life. For the rest of us, this has taken a while to make it into mainstream programming languages. In 2003, a language I just found out about last week called Nice has a question mark symbol and finally changes the default so that you don't have everything could be null at any time, only the things you mark explicitly. And so this is, in some ways similar to in Haskell and ML, you have a maybe or an option, and only things you wrap in that can be null. Everything else, the compiler gives you this guarantee that it's going to be there. So then, fast forward to 2010, 2011, we're finally getting languages that give us null safety, that tame the null monster. And this is the context in which GraphQL was originally being developed, 2012. So in 2012, there weren't really any mainstream production-ready languages that had proper null safety. And so GraphQL didn't either. The non-null operator did not exist yet at that time in GraphQL. It's not until 2014. And you have now Hack being developed inside Facebook, adds type safety on top of PHP. PHP dynamic language, Hack adds these types. And Hack also added null safety, which is really cool. And so then, by the time that GraphQL is open sourced in 2015, we have this non-null that's introduced. And there's other languages coming along the way. And so for the client, now we have Swift, which gives us good null safety. Kotlin, which I think has excellent null handling. And TypeScript. But TypeScript, it wasn't actually until 2016 with version 2.0 that TypeScript added a union of null and the possibility to have strict null checks. Now, if you have a type system, but anything can be null at any time, do you even have a type system? Or are you just cosplaying at having a type system? I think most of our languages that we've been using have types. Java and C and everything. Like it's really just been cosplay, honestly. But now we have the technology. So this brings us to 2020. I was working at Netflix, and our web developers are using CodeGen to introduce TypeScript types for GraphQL queries. This is really cool. But then you get types that look like this. well, maybe null, maybe null. This is maybe null. And remember, the Netflix graph doesn't use non-null that much. And so you have this situation where you have this nice, elegant type system, but you're still having to go through and explicitly check everywhere, is this null, is this null? And it's kind of a pain, right? So they say, hey, can we go in the schema and add all these non-nulls, and, add the bangs into our schema? But then on the server side, we're saying, well, distributed systems, and we're doing this federation thing, and like really anything could fail at any time, and so we don't want to do that. Okay, here. How about we'll let you decide. We'll give you a directive that you can put into your query, and then on the server, we'll just take that and then we'll flip the nullability. We'll make a field null if you want it to be. So this passes control to the client. Problem solved. What could possibly go wrong? Well, and it turns out, there's kind of a convergent evolution of the same idea. And so around the similar time at Facebook, they're bouncing around this idea of like a directive for the client. And so they have an internal hack day, and Jordan Eldridge codes up a prototype of this directive. They call it at required. And it defines a similar sort of behavior where the client can control how we're going to handle this. And then in 2021, there was a virtual happy hour with Netflix engineers and Yelp engineers. They were all working in GraphQL, and we got together. And because we're complete nerds, we were talking about nullability in our virtual happy hour. And it turns out also at Yelp, they were running into the same problem, and they had the same idea of, hey, what if we could maybe put a bang in the client query even? And and we were talking, and we thought, that would, yeah, that's, we were thinking exactly the same thing. We actually added this directive, but since it's just like a Netflix thing, and like it's not in the spec, open source code gen doesn't know about it, and so you still don't get those nice types. Wouldn't it be cool if this was just like part of the GraphQL spec? And so then that night, Alex Riley, who was an engineer at Yelp at the time, he literally overnight just bangs out a draft of an RFC to the GraphQL spec. Hey, let's do this. And so, this was brought to the GraphQL working group, and a really positive response, because this is something that we've all seen. As now that we're using all these languages that have good null handling, we want to be able to harness that even better. So over the last 2 years, this RFC, this proposal, has been iterated on, and we're going after those edge cases, and how's this going to look in when our nice whiteboard idea meets the real world. And so Alex has been championing this with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get this proposal toward the finish line. And so, like I said, it looks something like this. In your query, you can add a bang. And so this is the core of client controlled nullability. But there are some other edge cases and some other features that could be useful. Like, for example, let's say you have a schema, and it does have non-null. It has bangs in it already, but you actually want to handle those cases in your client. You want the partial data in that sense, in that case. And so you can add a question mark. There we go. And so this will flip the non-nullability the other direction. This will say, for this field, actually, it's okay. We're going to handle the non-null. In this case, we're going to show you a gray box with just the title. And so this gives even more control to the client. Okay, now there's still another case where in this schema, Logamo and movies, those are both lists of items. And so you might want to distinguish between the nullability of the items inside the list and the nullability of the list itself. And so we bounced around different ways you could indicate this. And so this is what we come up with, is you can specify for a Logamo, it's okay if the movies inside that are null, but we want to have the entire list. However, for the badges, that's just a UI treatment. We do want them to be something if they're in the list, but we don't need the entire list. So that's the gist of it. Now, in GraphQL, you can have multi-dimensional lists, right? You can have directly a list of lists of lists without intermediate objects. And so what if we have that, a 3D list? Don't laugh. This is, so you can specify that, right? You can say, okay, inside it can be nullable, but then not nullable, but then nullable. But yeah, I mean, we look at this and we're like, this is a lot. And so, is there any way we can reduce the noise here? Well, one mechanism is we'll call it a try-catch semantic. And so basically, in this example, we're just saying the ID field, we're going to mark that non-null. And then we're going to catch that up at the Lolimo parent level. So it's going to change the bubbling behavior of GraphQL and automatically bubble up all the way to where the next explicit question mark is in the client query. And so this is adding this try-catch because, once again, we're talking about nullability, but we're also conflating nullability and error handling. And so this is closer to kind of how we handle errors. But there's still one more problem, right? Here's our schema, and once again, we only have one net bang in here on the ID field. But there are some fields in here that we know on the server are going to be null sometimes because they're supposed to be. That's the reality of our data is that we want to model the idea that we might be out of peanut butter or we might not have a match score or something like that. A schema is fundamentally about communication, right? And communication with whom, with what? It's, primarily communication between humans, and then secondarily between the software pieces that we write. And this schema is failing at that when it comes to nullability. It's not expressing the true nullability of our data here. And there are others thinking these same things. And so just as recently as last week, Jordan Eldridge posted in GitHub this idea of true schema nullability, saying that the way that we use non-null in our schema means that the true or the expected nullability of a field has been lost. We don't have any way to represent that. And also literally last week I was on support and a developer asked like, well, how do we okay, I'm new to GraphQL, like, how am I supposed to indicate that this field should be null? And I said, well, I guess you put a comment into your schema. I'm sorry. And so then also in this post, Jordan said, well, if we could opt out somehow of coursing errors to null, which would basically mean opting out of this null bubbling, then we could go back to using the schema to model the human contract here. Now, concretely, what could this look like? One way we could do it is, whoa, hold up, not done yet. No spoilers. One way we could do it is, maybe a directive on our queries that says no bubbles, please, or something along those lines. There might be better things, but basically, do you like your GraphQL sparkling or tepid? Or we could introduce like a new operator. We leave the bang and its behavior as is, but then add something else, a directive or some other punctuation to say, hey, this is not supposed to be null, but it might be, because there might be an error. So basically, if this is null, there should be an error. You should see an error in the errors array, and your client should handle that. Now, of course, that would require clients that look into the errors array and handle those errors and don't just throw away the entire response, which, of course, we all do that, right? Okay. So, yeah. But, yeah, and personally, I like that, this is the interrobang, my favorite piece of punctuation. So, yeah, I'm going to be pushing for this. We can just remap our control key to the interrobang. It's going to be great. But another option that I'd like to float is that if we go to using the schema to express the true nullability of our data, then probably it's going to be the rarer case that we actually want something semantically to be null, and so maybe we flip and we only indicate the nullability. And so, like in this case, the match score, we're saying, hey, this is actually going to be null sometimes. You really need to handle in the client. Everything else, if we don't have an answer, it's because there's an error, there's an exception. Look in the errors array for that, and we can handle that case. And still on the client, you want some good control over how you're going to handle errors at different levels. And that's something that our client libraries can help us with. On the relay team, they've been doing a lot of work on iterating on controlling our exception handling in the clients. But this lets us indicate the true nullability in our schema. So now we have a lot of options, right? We have all kinds of fun things we can add to our queries. We can add some things to our schema. But I guess there's trade-offs, right? We can go towards convenience or more towards safety. And if we want to be completely comprehensive and handle every case, everything we want to do, then we sacrifice some simplicity. And simplicity, we don't want to underestimate that. Like, simplicity is one of the things that we really love about GraphQL, isn't it? We have other options for our APIs, and a lot of them are horrendously complex. A lot of them over the years that have existed, Corba and things that old people talk about, right? And so, how are we going to solve this? I don't know. But I'm going to tell you, this is a problem worth solving, and we need you. So back to Sir Tony Hoare, in the same talk where he claims credit for the null pointer, he mentions that a programming language designer should be responsible for the mistakes made by programmers using the language. This is kind of a bold statement, and it made me wonder, does this apply to GraphQL? And I think it does. Today, in 2023, we now have languages available for all our clients that have good null safety, good null handling. And we owe it to ourselves to have a GraphQL that can really take an advantage of that and really harness it. And so this is where it comes to you. So all this discussion and all this iteration that's been happening over the last couple of years, this happens in the open. There are meetings and discussions. The discussions are mostly in GitHub and some in Discord channel. And so this link brings you to the Client Controlled Nullability Working Group, subcommittee of the GraphQL Working Group. And you can find links there to discussions. In GitHub, you can add discussions and things. You can propose something totally different. You can advocate for the interrobang operator. Yes, right? And so come join, because there's two things we really need to move forward. One, we need implementations, and then we need those implementations in front of users, because every solution on the whiteboard is just beautiful and perfect until it meets the real world. And so before we add something and add complexity to the GraphQL spec, it needs to go before the crucible of reality, of real users. The GraphQL nullability is broken. Let's fix it. Thank you.